when you can't see the system, you often assume that you're not smart enough. And that is so far from the truth. We simply hadn't been handed the map. Welcome to the Climb Podcast, where we are diving into taboo topics and redefining the rules for women of color leaders. Get ready as we share the stories and amplify the voices of extraordinary women of color. From navigating workplace challenges to celebrating triumphs, on this podcast, we've got you covered. So buckle up and join us as we embark on today's empowering journey. Welcome to the Climb Podcast, where we empower women of color in the pursuit of leadership and management roles. I'm your host, Felicia Smith, the founder of The Climb. And each week on this podcast, we pull back the curtain on workplace realities that women of color face, offering honest conversation, practical insights, and helping you to build the confidence and keep climbing. But the most important thing is, I don't want you to climb alone, but for us to climb together. So in today's episode, our topic is, do you see what I see? You're probably underestimating how organizations work. So have you ever walked out of a meeting thinking that the decision that was made in that meeting didn't make any sense? Or you watched someone get promoted and you thought, like, what am I missing? Or you wondered why an idea even gained traction while another one that you thought was probably much better never even got off the ground. Most of us answer those questions by really focusing on the people involved. But really, what if the answer isn't just about people? What if it really is about the systems that are in place? So, one of the biggest shifts in my own leadership journey happened when I realized that I had been looking at the organizations through the lens of my job, the thing that I was responsible for doing. But executives really look at organizations through the lens of the entire business. Okay, so when we're looking at the same organization, but we're seeing things not the same way, it's probably because of our perspective and our lens. And so today, that's what our conversation is going to be about. And it's really about learning to develop an executive lens. Because leadership really isn't only about doing the work, it's about understanding the environment and where that work exists. Okay, so the higher you climb, the less your job is about doing the work. It's about really, again, understanding that system and where the work happens. And I know where the work happens sound a little funny, but it will make more sense as we go on. So let's jump into our first segment, Somebody Should Have Told Me, where we talk about all the things we wish we knew going into our careers. So someone should have told me that there really are two organizations. There's the one that you see on paper, and we talked about that. That's the org chart. And then there's the one that actually exists and plays out in real time on a day-to-day basis. So on paper, an organization looks simple, right? Their job titles, their, reporting relationships. If you have a good organization, you have policies and processes that make things appear very orderly. But if you've worked long enough in any organization, you know that that's not always how organizations work. As a matter of fact, you know that's not how organizations work at all, right? Sometimes organizations drive decisions that have nothing to do with the org chart and don't always follow those policies and procedures. It's really found in the relationships people have built, the trust they've earned, and the credibility they have established in that organization. It's about the history they share, the priorities they've tried to balance. It's about what's the political capital they built up over time. And I didn't really understand that early in my career. I knew that working was important and I knew my job in delivering results and understanding my responsibility. But then I began to really understand the organization. And when I started to do that and started sitting into different rooms, particularly where senior leaders were making decisions, I noticed something very key that they weren't discussing the work, right? They weren't discussing the project that I was working on in just that silo. They were asking questions that often I had never considered. They will ask questions like, how will this affect other parts of the organizations? Who needs to be brought into the conversation? What happened the last time we tried this? Do we have the support to make it successful? What risk are we not seeing? I know I'm a risk girl, so risk is always important to me. And I remember thinking, like, we're looking at the same problem, but we're seeing it completely different. And that's when it really clicked for me that the difference wasn't my intelligence, it was my perspective. So oftentimes you go into rooms and you feel like, oh, I'm not smart enough, or I didn't know this thing, or I'm not. No, no, it's not an intelligence issue. It's really about shifting your perspective in those conversations. So most people look at organizations through their own role. They're looking at it through just their thing. But, when leaders get in a room, they are really looking at that organization through the lens of the entirety, not the part that they're supposed to manage or the part that they're in control of. And that realization should change how you approach leadership. You have to stop asking, how does this affect my work? And really start again asking, how does this fit into the bigger picture? And this is something that I've been saying over and over again because it's super important. The higher you climb, the less it's about managing your piece. Okay. And that's why if you're only looking at managing your piece, then your perspective is going to be different than another senior leader or executive. It's all about how the pieces are fitting together in the organization. So, for many women of color, this is a shift that's hard and it isn't our fault because so much of how an organization really works gets passed quietly, right? In hallway conversations, over coffee, in rooms that often we weren't invited to. I have a story about that. I'm gonna wait till I retire to tell it though. We're often taught to keep our heads down, to let the work speak for itself, to stay far away from anything that looked like politics. I remember very distinctly when I left my very first job out of college, one of the reasons I told myself I left was because I did not want to deal with politics. Like, I'm not doing this. I'm not dealing with no politics. I'm just going to be a hard worker and this isn't organization for me. And I thought when I left that organization that I would never be dealing with politics again. And I mistaked politics also for not understanding the systems of the organization. True enough, I didn't like them and I probably wasn't a good fit, but at the time, I didn't really understand it. So when you can't see the system, you often assume that you're not smart enough to understand it. And that is so far from the truth, right? We simply hadn't been handed the map of how to understand it. So, developing an executive lens isn't about becoming political. People say, well, I don't want to get into politics. I don't want to become political. That's not what this is. It's about really refusing to lead with half of the picture. You have everything you need to understand the whole system. And you have every right to be in a room where it's understood. So, you have to say to yourself, this isn't about politics. This is about me changing my perspective or putting on my executive lens, just as simple as me taking off my glasses and putting my glasses back on. That can be the metaphor for you putting on your executive lens. So that brings me to our second segment, Truth Is. And Truth is all about the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Today, we're talking about how we see organizations. So when you learn to see an organization the way that an executive does, you stop guessing, start understanding. One of the things that we do innately when we're new in our careers, we want to present well, is we're trying to guess the persona, the person that we should be, the thing that we should be in order to get others to see us in a particular way. And oftentimes those things aren't true and authentic to who we are. When you understand your perspective in the executive lens, you stop guessing and you become more sure of yourself because you just have a better understanding of what's going on. So you're not trying to pinpoint what people want. You are now operating in your genius and what is important to you. So instead of talking about office politics in the abstract, let's talk about how this is practical. So here are five things that executives see. Number one, they see relationships. It's not just who reports to a person. You got to know who trusts, who influences, who collaborates well, who has credibility. That's number one. Number two, competing priorities. Departments aren't fighting because people are difficult. They are optimizing for different outcomes. So finance will have a different outcome than operations, than HR, than legal. Every function defines success differently, right? So understanding that changes everything because where you sit, as I said before, is where you stand. And where you're sitting, your fight's going to look a little bit different. History. Every organization has a memory, and sometimes you weren't even there for the history. So, understanding the history, the past reorganizations, and what it did to the culture of that organization, the failed initiatives, the leadership changes that shaped a portion of the organization that left an indelible mark, the broken trust that happened with the organization, previous successes. These experiences shape the current decisions. And I think we don't talk enough about that, particularly in organization change and how our organization functions. There's so much history into why a thing works the way it does. If it's not a brand new company, there's history there. So if you find that something is a little weird, and you're like, why is it going this way? You should probably understand the history because there's probably something behind how it got there. Four, unwritten rules. Every workplace has them, every place has them. How decisions really get made, who gets consulted, who needs to be informed, what leadership truly rewards. These rarely appear in a handbook or anybody's going to tell you. Those are the unwritten rules that you have to figure out, find, talk to people who know, who are trusted advisors. And then finally, number five, it's the business. Executives constantly ask, how does this affect my customer, my stakeholder, revenue? How does it affect the risks? How does it affect my people, which is a big part, our reputation as an organization, our mission? Those are key questions that really shape how executives think. And that's why decisions sometimes seems confusing and you're evaluating them from your own role because you're evaluating them from your role while they're looking at it from an enterprise perspective. And so oftentimes when I'm thinking about something, even as an executive today, I'm like, this does not make sense. I don't understand whatever. And I can be evaluating it even from that enterprise or organizational view. But I often remind myself that there are probably pieces to that puzzle that I just don't understand or I don't have right now. Right. And so my perspective isn't the only perspective, and the reason it might be different is because I don't have the full picture. And that's a big piece that you have to remember and consider as you're making decisions and as you're learning the organization. So, how do we start seeing what other executives see? So, let's move into our final segment, another rung men didn't climb. So, instead of teaching you office politics, I want to give you what I'm calling the executive lens framework. Okay. So, this week, when something at work doesn't make sense, which that happens every week probably, do not immediately ask, why would they do that? People do that so often. They either say, why would they do that? Or that was a bad call. Or I can't believe that's what they just do. But instead, I want you to ask these five questions. Instead of just saying it's a bad idea, ask the questions. What business problem might they be trying to solve? So, number one, what are we solving for? I always ask people the question, where are we going? What's the outcome? What's the thing? That I always work from the back forward. If I'm working at the beginning, then I've lost the ending. And I always want to know where I'm going so I can figure out how to get there. And you can't plan if you just start at the beginning. You got to know where you're going. Question two, what information might leadership have that I don't? I need you to always know that there's something you don't know. Don't ever think that you have the full picture. Even when you feel like you have all the information that everyone else has and I got the full picture, you still do not. There is always something that you don't know. There's a conversation that was had that you weren't a part of. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. But I want you, because of that, to always leave your mind open and curious to know that you don't always have the full picture. There's going to be things that you're going to be missing. There's going to be things that you don't know. So you got to ask that question. Number three, you have to ask, who are the stakeholders? Who are the people who are involved? Number four, what are the competing priorities that exist? because it might not just be this particular thing that's going on. And then question 5, what are the constraints that could be influencing the decision? Decisions often don't just come out of nowhere, and most executives don't just pull it out of the bag. They are weighing several things and putting several things together to get to that picture. So the next time you hear something that you're like, man, that's wow, instead of just saying that's wow or that's a bad call, think about those 5 questions and begin to shift your perspective from acting like an employee who does not have all the pieces and really thinking like a leader. Okay. So for our reflection this week, I want you to think of one recent decision at work that frustrated you and didn't make any sense. Think about it. And instead of asking, why would they do that? Run through all the 5 questions. Then ask yourself, what might I be able to see now that I couldn't have seen before? What might I be able to see now that I couldn't see before? And that's such a introspective and reflective question. I'm a very reflective person. I love this kind of stuff. The goal isn't to excuse every decision. So I'm not saying that you're trying to reason to make every decision make sense, because even after you do the 5 questions, sometimes it doesn't make sense to you. But the goal is really to understand the system well enough to lead inside it, understanding the calculus and what has made some people successful and less successful. So I want to leave you with this thing. The goal isn't to become cynical about your organization, it's to become wiser. Because once you understand how organizations really work, you stop thinking that every decision is personal. You become more strategic. You build stronger relationships. You communicate differently. You anticipate the challenges. And that's what executive leadership really requires. Not just seeing your work, but seeing the entire system your work lives inside. That's a big ask, but it's something that you have to be consistently working on in order to get better at. You don't rise by working harder inside your box. You rise by learning to see the whole picture and then helping others to see it too, like I'm trying to do with you right now. Okay. That's the podcast. If you know someone who is struggling to see the whole picture, who feel like things have just soured, I want you to share this episode with them, because I want them to think differently about their organization. Again, not to excuse away decisions that they think may have been good or bad, but to really put on their executive lens and understand the perspectives of others in that room who are making decisions. So share it with a woman who is also ready to lead beyond her role, who's looking to go to the next level. Having this executive lens really is something that helps you to think at the next level. Because at the end of the day, we are not just climbing careers, we are again building ladders. And so until next time, continue to climb and continue to strive. I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning into the Climb Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on wherever you listen to podcasts. For updates and behind-the-scenes content, make sure you're following us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Join the Climb. Until next time, keep climbing and keep thriving, sis. See you next episode.